Hello everyone and welcome to the Armchair Zealots podcast. Today is super special because it's the first episode of the pod. I'm going to dive straight into it and talk about the 2024 US election. We're going to give insights into some of the candidates, their campaigns, and discuss who we think is likely to win the primaries, as well as who we think is likely to drop out, unfortunately.
First, a quick introduction of the candidates in the election, as well as what, in our view, are the three questions that will decide the outcome of the upcoming election. To begin, the man on everyone's minds, Donald Trump, ex-US president, center of news cycles, both foreign, domestic, and abroad. According to most markets and polling groups, the clear frontrunner for the election. However, his indictment and other issues introduce a certain volatility that voters may wish to distance themselves from. Next, another man on everyone's minds, sitting president of America, Joe Biden. Recently, he's been praised by Democrats for his handling of LGBTQ issues, but criticized by Republicans and others, such as RFK Jr., for his stances on the Russia-Ukraine war, his relationship with his son, and many other issues, both foreign and domestic. Finally, the final frontrunner worthy of mention, Ron DeSantis. Unique in many ways, and seemingly not comparable to Trump and Biden, notably for his age, and unique foreign policy, as well as domestic policy. Donald Trump has criticized, mainly in the last few months, two people in particular. These being fellow frontrunner in the Republican Party, Ron DeSantis, and sitting president Joe Biden, who beat Donald Trump in 2020. His criticisms of Ron DeSantis have been on various issues, including COVID, foreign and domestic policy alike. And his criticisms of Joe Biden have been of similar nature. Trump has criticized not only DeSantis and Biden, but also fellow candidates such as RFK Jr. and Vivek Ramaswamy for their various policies additionally. These two underdogs, Vivek Ramaswamy and RFK Jr., will also take up a segment of the podcast at a later time, where we're going to be examining the chances of various underdogs in winning the election. Next candidate that we're going to be examining in detail, Joe Biden. Joe Biden is the sitting US president, and he's had his fair share of news cycles dedicated to him and his family in recent times as well. Hunter Biden's various shenanigans, as well as Joe Biden's foreign and domestic policy with regard to the Ukraine-Russia war, and many other areas of foreign policy, such as his pullout from Afghanistan, have drawn criticism from many people who wish to criticize him, but also has drawn the attention of many of his supporters. And he definitely, other than Donald Trump, has the highest chance in the upcoming election.
So let's just start with Donald Trump here. Obviously, we know that his biggest threat is really just Ron DeSantis. You know that if he gets past the primaries, it's very likely that he beats Biden. We'll just have a look at over the 2016 election where he won against Hillary Clinton, but in 2020, he lost to Joe Biden. And this really came from the top three states in the North of America, obviously being Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. You know, in Michigan, in 2016, he won the state by 0.3%. But in 2020, he lost by 2.7% to Joe Biden. He's losing these. And this is what happened in 2020. He was losing these blue-collared workers who were his support base. And now he's just got the MAGA supporters, but he needs more. He needs some independent voters on his side as well.
So this brings me to the three questions that are going to determine this upcoming election. The first question is, which way are independents going to break in 2024? Clearly, by statistics, data, and everything we've seen regarding the 2016 election, 3 independents in a room in 2016, 2 broke for Trump, 1 broke for Hillary. In 2020, 3 independents in a room, 2 broke for Biden, 1 broke for Trump. What's going to decide this election is, if there's 3 independents in a room, which way are they going to break? Are they going to break for the Republican or Democratic candidate? And this may depend largely on who the election is a referendum on. If it's a referendum on DeSantis, if it's a referendum on Trump, if it's a referendum on any Republican candidate, it seems that Republican candidates stand less of a chance, as incumbent or sitting presidents often have much more criticism associated with them, but have a higher chance of approval rating because they've had chances to affect their policy, whereas candidates only have chances to speak about the policy, but not affect their policy. The second question that's going to affect this election is, which Republican candidate is going to win the 2024 Republican nomination? See, the RNC have released certain statistics as well as 538 polls about which candidates are going to be frontrunners in the upcoming election. Regarding Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis, it seems currently that Donald Trump's the frontrunner over Ron DeSantis. However, this could change as DeSantis has only recently announced his candidacy for the presidency and for the Republican nomination.
Yeah, so you just mentioned Ron DeSantis now, and the way he will win this is if there's less candidates in the Republican primary. So Trump, we know he has 30% of voters who are voting for him regardless of what he does, regardless of what he says.
Even if he's in prison, I would like to add. Additionally, this brings me to the final question that's going to decide this election, which is, which way are Republican voters who are voting for minor candidates such as Vivek Ramaswamy, Nikki Haley, and others going to break? If these candidates are encouraging their voters to go for DeSantis or for Trump, then it seems that the sway of these candidates is going to largely decide who the Republican nominee is going to be. For example, Nikki Haley has criticized Ron DeSantis quite staunchly and has stuck by Trump's side, maybe attempting in a bid to become Trump's vice president in 2024 should he win the nomination.
But on the other hand, of course, you have Chris Christie, whose whole campaign is built on trying to get Trump out of that nomination, trying to get Republican voters away from Trumpism and try to bring them to the future, which he believes is himself, of course, but also DeSantis, people like Vivek Ramaswamy.
And as we can see in polling data from 538, currently, most voters for these minor candidates such as Christie, Sununu, Asa Hutchinson, Vivek Ramaswamy, Nikki Haley, and Mike Pence are breaking for Ron DeSantis. This is clear in the fact that in two-way polling data, a poll where recipients of the poll were simply asked in a split-second decision between Trump and DeSantis, which would you choose? That number, 35% for Ron DeSantis, is much higher than the mere 22% that he would get with the presence of these minor candidates, meaning that largely these minor candidates, when they drop out inevitably, as they've done in every previous election, are definitely going to give a large majority of their votes to DeSantis after they've dropped out.
I just want to get into Trump's situation a bit more because we've never seen this from a president or a former president before. You know, lawsuits, indictments, like the FBI raiding his house. It's all happening at once. But every time something like this happens, it's amazing. His poll numbers go up. So, like, what does that mean for this election? What's DeSantis' plan to beat that? And how can he try get into the news more so maybe he can get the voters on his side a bit more?
So it seems that the bread and butter Trump supporter loves Trump for one reason only, which is Donald Trump receives the fire of the entire legacy media, Democratic Party, and left. Now, we're not making any value judgments about whether this is going to help Trump or not in the long run. However, it's a mere observation that voters are attracted to Donald Trump because of the fire that he draws from the news media and from the Democratic Party. For example, in 2016, when the entire news media attacked Donald Trump, his reputation, and based on various allegations of things he had said and things he had done, Donald Trump's numbers soared, and that allowed him to achieve the nomination and become the president ultimately.
I think it's important to mention here as well, though, that DeSantis and Trump used to be very close. All their policies used to be aligned. And now what DeSantis needs to do is he needs to find some policies that he can attack Trump on from his time in office. He needs to find small details and say, no, I would have done that differently. No, you did that wrong. And he started doing that, for example, with Dr. Anthony Fauci and COVID and his whole response with that. But he needs to find more points to go against Trump and just show separation between his campaign and Trump's campaign.
So what we're hearing from a lot of left-wing politicians and also political pundits is that Ron DeSantis is simply a knockoff version of Trump. Why would we want a cover band when the actual band is still playing, right? This is a lot of the discourse that we're hearing around Trump and DeSantis. The question is this going to hold? Is this going to be true? Are Republican voices really looking at DeSantis and seeing a knockoff version of Trump? Or are they seeing something that's actually attracting them? Now, if we look at DeSantis' poll numbers over the last 2 months, they've actually increased since June 1st. And they've gone up from Trump's 52.9% lead over DeSantis to now a mere 32% lead over DeSantis. So therefore, it seems that DeSantis' numbers are increasing. The question is there a ceiling to this? Is it going to peak? Is it going to increase? And how are we going to measure this?
100%. Like, now that his campaign's really picking up some speed, and now Trump needs to start attacking him, needs to start making campaigns against him, because it's starting to get closer by the day.
That's true, but I feel like what I should also mention is that if Trump does run as an independent, that this will break the Republican voters in half. How do you think this will affect the overall election? Do you think Joe Biden will win?
I think if that is the case, the election is already done because Biden will still get his Democratic voters, 50%, around 50%, but the Republican vote is split into half. So maybe 25 will go to Trump, 25 will go to DeSantis, or whoever the Republican candidate is, and the 50% will go to Biden. So the election would be over already.
The Democratic base seems very robust in its center. That means if we draw a line from most radical to least radical in the Democratic base, there's very few who are extremely radical and there's very few who are not very radical. It seems that most of the Democratic base have baseline robust Democratic policies, and these seem to have done quite well. For example, Obama won 2 elections on maybe three issues. There weren't that many issues that decided many past Democratic nominations. And therefore, we can assume that Biden's base is strong and robust, and that if the Republican base is split, then the election will go his way, without question.
Yeah. So obviously, but we think that Biden will win, but it's not a done deal. He's not the only candidate for the Democratic Party. Obviously, we have RFK, we have Susan Williamson, but we're just going to touch base with RFK for now. We also have someone who's picking up speed in his campaign. That's Vivek Ramaswamy. Now,
a large underdog, according to most pundits and candidates, especially stellar candidates. However, Donald Trump has wished him luck. A lot of fellow candidates have wished him luck, and this seems to be working in his favor.
Yeah, he's a very interesting man. Very intelligent. That's 100% certain. But you can see that some of his thoughts have actually not gone well with the media, not gone well with the Republican Party. For example, on the Ukraine and Russia war, he said, let Russia keep what it seized in Ukraine and restore economic relations with the West in exchange for some other major concessions. Those include an end to Moscow's partnership with Beijing. So he's not really so concerned with Ukraine and the Russia war and ending it. He wanted to end it, but only for America's gain. And that would be the stop of the partnership between Russia and China.
So we can take this back to a major theme in Republican candidates since 2000 when George Bush was elected, which is non-interventionism. Non-interventionism means, are we going to intervene in foreign conflicts? Are we going to land troops on foreign soil and say we are a force for good and we are a force for democracy? Is that a way that Republicans and Americans want their leader to govern? In 2008, George Bush led the Iraq War, and in such a case, it seemed the Republicans ended up actually standing against, by polling data, standing against such a policy of interventionism. Then we had Trump. Trump had, according to most historians, the most peaceful presidency in US history. However, recently, with the Ukraine and Russia conflict, peace is sorely lacking in the United States and in their domestic and foreign policy.
Yeah, 100%. But there's definitely something about Ramaswamy, just getting back onto him. He's got the charisma. He's a wealthy businessman, just like Trump was. He's an outsider. He's not being run by wealthy businessmen who have a political agenda which he must follow. He's young. He's a man of color. And so really, he says that he's an outsider, and I think that's what you only get to be once. And Trump's now, he's very much into the politics scene. Ramaswamy just is an outsider, and he can use that to his advantage, 100%.
And a lot of what attracted voters to Trump, seemingly in 2016, was that he was an outsider. They were tired of career politicians running their country, and they wanted something different. And that's what got him elected in 2016. However, it appears by 2020, they had lost the taste for him.
And it's very interesting because Ramaswamy's not getting the poll numbers Trump did back in 2016 when he was an outsider. He's getting 3%, 4%. What does he need? Does he need controversial statements? What does he need to get where Trump was as an outsider?
It seems the field currently is much more packed than it was in 2016. Who was Donald Trump's major contenders? Who were the major candidates who stood a threat to him in 2016? We had Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, and Ted Cruz. These are the three that come to mind. Now, if we look at the relationship between Trump and these candidates, Trump was aggressively attacking them for being career politicians, for not fulfilling their promises. And Vivek may not have such points of attack on the current Republican candidates, such as Trump and DeSantis. Trump and DeSantis seem to be much more solid candidates than previous candidates in the Republican nominations, such as Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, and Jeb Bush. However, maybe in the upcoming months, we'll see a change in the statistics. However, for now, it seems that Trump and DeSantis are, in fact, the only frontrunners.
So definitely the primary of the Republicans is definitely getting a lot more heated and congested. But I just want to say, I do think, this is my prediction, I think what will happen is the Republican primaries, such as Chris Christie, I think even Mike Pence, and people like Vivek Ramaswamy, they will drop out. And what that will do is that will bring DeSantis' numbers up. Because I think once they're 3%, they're 2%, it seems like a low number. But once you keep on adding that up, that goes to DeSantis. A lot of those numbers aren't going to Trump. Especially in this case of Chris Christie, where he's saying, go against Trump. Whatever you do, don't vote for Trump. Now, so what I think will happen, it will be a Trump and DeSantis 1v1. I think it could go really either way. It's on a nice edge.
So I would like to ask, which way do you think it is going to go? Purely conjecture, purely a ballpark, but I would like to hear which way you think the Republican nomination would go. And secondly, would Trump run as an independent if DeSantis beat him for the nomination? Those two questions.
Yeah, it's tough. I think Trump would take it. I think maybe by 5%, possibly even less than that. But I do think that Trump has it. His charisma, his controversial statements, I think that's what gets him over the line. But I do think that if DeSantis were to win, or any other candidate were to win, I do actually think that Trump would run as an independent, because he loves this. He loves going on campaigns and going around the country and just being that celebrity that he loves being. And so I think that he will run as an independent. I don't think he'll think that he'll get it, but I do think that if he doesn't get to the Republican primary, he'll run as an independent.
This will conclude our analysis of the Republican candidates in the upcoming election. However, we're going to now speak about upcoming frontrunner RFK Jr. in his battle against Joe Biden for the Democratic nomination.
So there's a clear battle between RFK and Joe Biden regarding who will win the Democratic seat for the upcoming 2024 election. For RFK, he holds both conservative and liberal views. The first one being anti-vax.
So, number one, I would like to add two things about this. Firstly, he's tried to roll back many of his anti-vax positions. He's obviously said some wild things. I think you have some data and some quotes from him. So, when it comes to RFK, and when it comes to how we're going to categorize him, are we going to categorize him as largely a Democrat who's pandering to Republican voters? Or are we going to categorize him as just a Democrat who's non-standard, but isn't actually political in the nature of how he's non-standard for a Democrat?
That's true. So I have a quote here by RFK whereby he says that a lot of diseases have been found in the vaccine, namely the Spanish flu. Now, this can be seen as quite a problem, as no research actually indicates this. And a problem for his campaign could be that he's not providing enough context with when he's pushing his narrative.
Yeah, having no statistics, having no evidence behind you, having views that are largely considered conspiracy theories are definitely not a recipe to get elected. However, he holds 20% of the Democratic base right now. That's something we need to keep in mind. It's 80-20 Biden to RFK. So do you think that RFK's base are coming from people who are disaffected with Joe Biden, or it's coming from people who genuinely support him?
I do think it is people who think that Joe Biden is too old to run. He's not cognitively there. I don't think that people think he's a great candidate. I don't think the Democratic Party really has great candidates right now. I think you have Joe Biden, but what happens if he's not there? You don't have anyone who's the leader, the new leader, the future leader of the Democratic Party.
So I think it's a risk to say two things, which one of them you just said, which is firstly, I think it's a risk to say that Joe Biden is a weak candidate. I think 2020 showed us that he can be a very, very strong candidate, despite his age, despite maybe some issues that Republicans and critics have with the way he speaks, with his policies. I think that Joe Biden is not to be underestimated. And the second problematic statement I find when it comes to Joe Biden is he's not mentally there. He's not aware of what's going around him. Obviously, these criticisms, they play at people's sense of humor. They think, the person in charge is a bumbling fool. But really, Joe Biden lately, largely, has had some great policies tactically, and has also played to his base very well in many of his speeches and also his policies.
But you have to remember, Biden in 2020 was different to Biden in 2024, and what he will be in 2024. Back in 2020, he had a few stumbles. And by that time, what happened in Afghanistan hadn't happened. COVID, he was like the front runner on COVID. You had Trump, who was doing a terrible job, or at least that's what people thought. And Biden was like the savior to the COVID problem. But 2024, the world is a different place. Biden is older. Biden is slower. I don't think it's the same.
So I think you're right that Biden's chances have only decreased since 2020. However, I still think he's a strong candidate. I still think he has very good chances, and he's not to be underestimated for any reason whatsoever.
100%, 100%. But RFK is obviously, he's still there. You know, he's still in the race, and he's going to continue to put his name out.
Yeah, I would just like to provide a mixed opinion on this. I just would like to pose you both a question. The first one being, do you think that Joe Biden won the election in 2020, or did Donald Trump lose? And the second one being, the polls currently show that in 2024, Joe Biden has a 71% approval rating compared to 17 for Kennedy. Do you think that this will change much?
So your question seemingly is, was 2020 a referendum on Trump or Biden? And it was definitely a referendum on Trump. COVID hit him. Biden could come in. And if it was all a referendum on Biden, it seems in US history, US presidents, when the referendum is on them, lose elections. Because the referendum is usually not on them for good reason. Back to RFK, who we previously mentioned, I would like to quickly examine his foreign policy views. So there's a spectrum of his views when it comes to how they hold with non-interventionism. Non-interventionism is basically to say the US soldiers belong on US soil, defending US values and principles. They don't belong elsewhere. And 5 issues that I want to tackle are, number 1, foreign aid spending. Number 2, Syria and ISIS. How should the US intervene with Syria and ISIS? Number 3, the Ukraine war. And number 4, probably the most non-interventionist of his foreign policies, is should the US have membership in the UN? And finally, should Ukraine join NATO? So when it comes to foreign aid spending, when asked if foreign aid spending should be increased, RFK responded in the negative, stating that foreign aid spending should not be increased under any circumstances and should in fact be decreased. Now, this clearly holds with many of his conservative views on foreign policy, especially the fact that he's not interventionist and much foreign aid spending, for example, to Ukraine, is against his policies. Second, should the US be intervening and formally declaring war on ISIS in Syria? He's responded in the negative to this, saying that US soldiers belong on US soil. Again, non-interventionism, which could play very well with the Democratic base in 2024. What do you think is the main issue that's on the voters, that's on the mind of Democratic voters between RFK and Joe Biden when it's in the lead up to the 2024 election?
I think it has to be what you briefly touched on with the Ukrainian NATO-Russia dispute. I feel like this is now it's the hot topic currently, and I feel like his opinion on it will definitely decide.
Yeah, it's interesting because RFK asked Biden actually for a debate between the Democratic candidates. And the last time that this happened with an incumbent president was actually Richard Nixon in 1960. So you don't expect Biden to say yes to that. He's leading in the polls. Why risk it by maybe having a mistake on the debate stage? But it's interesting that RFK is attacking. He's really attacking Biden. He says, I want the Democratic Party to know my opinions, to know my beliefs, and put the front issues like the Russian-Ukraine war on the forefront of the election, really.
So I would like to add, when it comes to RFK's view on Ukraine's membership in NATO, when asked, should Ukraine join NATO, he responded point blank, no, there is too much corruption in Ukraine.
Wow.
This is a view that is clearly not in line with any standard politician who's currently running in 2024. You have Joe Biden, who clearly holds that Ukraine should join NATO, a much more interventionist view on America's role in the world at large. We have Donald Trump, who's responded clearly, much like Ron DeSantis and many others, that the Ukraine war must be handled diplomatically and that more lives should not be lost, that death needs to stop. But RFK's view is it's different. It's outside of the rest of the pack. There's too much corruption in Ukraine, he said. This seems to me, at least, to be a clear indictment on his behalf of the US's handling of Ukraine. And who handled the US's intervention with Ukraine? Joe Biden. And this could be a great avenue of criticism for RFK regarding Joe Biden. Finally, when it comes to the question that he was asked, should the US provide military assistance to defend Ukraine from Russia? He stated in the negative, saying no. This is clearly outside of the realm of what most voters are expecting from their candidates. However, this could play well for voters who want a standard Democratic candidate on many, many areas. However, on certain areas, hold with non-interventionism much more than interventionist policies that have typified much of Democratic candidacy for the last 50 years.
Oh, interesting.
Just to touch up on where Kennedy wants to put the money, as he said, he wants to cut the military spending, and instead reinvested it into the domestic spending of development, as this will counteract the economic challenges that obviously COVID has hit America with. This actually supports what Joe Biden has been saying, as he feels that he's revitalized the American economy, trying to stabilize it. How do you feel like this will pose a threat to DeSantis and Trump in the upcoming election?
So I think that any candidate who entered and became president in 2020, after COVID had basically had its peak, the worst of COVID was over, would have a great chance ahead of them. Economic growth, increased approval ratings. If things get better under your candidacy, if things get better under your presidency, then it seems that people approve you more. This can be proven with Obama after 2008. His election, his approval rating skyrocketed from 2008 to 2009. Also, Donald Trump by 2019 had his highest approval rating in January of 2019. However, with the onset of COVID, then I think that would have tanked any president, and it may not be fair to criticize him on this. However, I may be wrong, and if you disagree, then feel free to raise this.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And like RFK is such an interesting personality, brings so many different thoughts and tables to the Democratic Party, which a lot of which they haven't seen before. We say that Biden is a moderate, or at least we think he's a moderate Democratic candidate. So I want to get really into the crux of the question is, who do you guys think that will win the Democratic primary? Is it going to be Biden, which we think it will be, but also more than that, will he continue to keep the large lead, very large lead, like around 70%, some polls say even 80%, or will it get much more close, maybe due to a debate that happens? What do you guys think will plan out?
So I think it's always going to be interesting to examine such a candidate as RFK, someone who's clearly different from the rest of the pack when it comes to candidates that we have on offer for 2024. It's going to be interesting, but I do think it's somewhat ignorant to say that he has any chance of beating Biden in 2024. However, if you disagree, feel free to voice that. But it seems that Joe Biden, with his 80% hold on the Democratic base, is clearly a candidate that's more robust, that's going to be supported by his base, and that is probably not going to suffer any consequences from RFK running when it comes to whether he's going to achieve the nomination or not.
That may be true, but I have a differing opinion. I feel that, as the 2024 polls state, 53% of the people in America disapprove with Joe Biden. And I think once you factor in how many people vote, how many people care about the elections, I feel like that number will increase. I feel that RFK will provide a new face for the Democratic Party. His conservative and also liberal views, I think, provide a well-rounded foundation for the Democratic Party, and his, especially foreign policy, I think that will definitely play a key role in the results of the election.
All in all, though, it's very early in the race. A lot is still to happen. Debates. The primaries haven't even begun yet. But 100% here on the Armchair Zealots podcast, we'll keep on giving you updates about the race, about the candidates, and keeping it interesting.
This has been the Armchair Zealots podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back shortly.